Good evening. Many of you have been upstairs, and the ones that haven't, please do so. We have a fantastic show. It's a tribute to the creative brilliance of production designer Mark Friedberg, who is our guest tonight. And he has been incredibly generous and has given us probably our most ambitious and stimulating show ever at this year at the cinema. So we are very, very grateful. When we talked about doing this exhibit, which by the way is going to be up until Labor Day, after Labor Day, so tell your friends. Mark immediately mentioned, I said, which movies are we showing? And immediately says POLLOCK. And I love the suggestion because it's a film that it turns 25 years in 2025. It's a film about art, about an artist. It was shot locally and with the help of other local artists. So it just tied in wonderfully in what we wanted to do with this tribute to Mark. And Mark, probably he has been working with filmmakers such as Wes Anderson, Todd Haynes, Jim Jarmusch, Barry Jenkins, and he has 3 upcoming movies: Caught Stealing by Darren Aronofsky, New Spike Lee, and Brother, Mother, Sister, Brother. No, Brother, Mother, Sister, Father. Father, Mother, Sister, Brother. I can never get it together by Jim Jarmusch, which is beautiful. So all the films will be shown at the cinema. We'll bring him back during the summer as well. And to talk a little bit about POLLOCK and about Mark's work, I'm going to bring in Mark Friedberg and the producer of the film, Fred Berner.
Thank you, Mark.
Fred Berner is the producer of the film, but more importantly, he's one of my closest friends and someone I love very much.
I apologize in advance for the love fest that you will witness, but it's deeply genuine, as is the movie and our friendship.
It's maybe because of the movie.
It started and deepened, and we are here to talk about it. And see it, which I haven't seen in 25 years. So, and on a big screen, I'm super excited. Giulia, do you want to ask us anything, or would you like me to start?
Yes, I do, because I think that the original edition is his first film by an actor, Ed Harris, already well known as an actor, a very talented actor. He was never, he never directed anything. He was obsessed by this biography, the Pollock biography, and wanted to make this movie, wanted to direct it. I understand that initially they thought that for cost reason, it was going to be done somewhere else. Is that the case?
Yeah, and Mark became very hard to get at that moment. What happened was we were trying to make a movie for a price, and that's what we do most of the time when we make movies. And I asked Mark if he would join us in telling the story, and he asked me where we were going to do it, and I said, we're looking to do it in Canada, possibly. And he said, and then there was a hang-up after that. And I said, okay, but I got to do my due diligence and see what I can figure out. And we went to Canada. We drove around in a scout van for days and days and days, and after 3 or 4 days in the scout van, I looked at Ed because he was cogitating and he was thinking and he was standing out on a rock and he was doing all the things that he does when he internalizes where he wants to make a movie. And one of the things that Mark and I always talk about is the place, the place, the place. But he turned to me and I said, so in my timid early producer voice, I said, so what do you think, man? Can we do it here? Do you want to do it? What do you think? And he turned around and he said to me, well, if you give me a captain's hat and a pipe, maybe we can make a commercial for fish sticks. I said, okay, I guess we're going home. So, and we went to a bar. It was near where I lived, down on Houston Street, and we called Mark. And we had 2 huge hurdles to climb, and one was where to shoot the movie, and the other was how to reproduce the paintings. I was nervous. There was a lot on the line. And Mark jumped in. I said, hey, man, help me. You got to help me.
Actually, you guys were trying to do it based out of Manhattan. So you were looking for a place to commute to, and not finding anything close.
Oh, right, that was the second choice. We found someplace, I don't know, in Garrison, New York, upstate somewhere.
So Fred and Ed called me and asked me to come in and say what I think, which isn't always the thing that happens in the movies. A lot of times people want you to say what they think. But I came in and thought about the predicament they were in, a long commute, which you have to pay for, and maybe upstate New York doesn't necessarily feel so Pollocky. But I said I knew a place that looked a lot like the Pollock house on Fireplace Road. And having grown up half a mile away from it, a little more than half a mile away from it, not only did I know it well, but I knew it to be a special place, and for me, an exalted place. And so I really believed that that was part of what influenced Pollock to do his best work, which is where it happened. And also the only place he was probably sober his whole life was out here. And that coincided with him doing his special work. But there's something about Accabonac, something about the horizon there, that has spoken to painters, and it spoke to me. So we dove in. I'd like that idea of being Pollock in the Pollock house. And then obviously we couldn't shoot the whole movie out here, and we still, I think, stayed more or less in the range, at least the parts that I was responsible for. And so we ended up deciding to build the interiors in an armory in Brooklyn and shoot the exteriors out here, which we had to do over a few passes based on the, having to chronicle his physical changes and some of the other stuff that happened.
Speaking of the Paula Krasner house, I think there is someone here, Helen Harrison.
Is Helen here?
Yeah, she's right here, and she's the longtime director of the Paula Krasner house.
So Helen became the high priestess of telling this story the right way. And that's why what the movie you're going to see is not a Hollywood movie. And someone, I think in one of the papers, wrote Hollywood designer who lives in the Springs. Wrong. Ed spent a lot of time with Helen in the house. And I think really she unlocked the door for him to who the true
Literally.
is. Yes. Did you want to say something?
She unlocked the door and she turned down the bed sheets and let Ed sleep there to infuse the personality of Jackson Pollock and let us all really inhale the essence of the place, which is, again, we keep going back to the place.
Well, we're going to inhale the essence of Ed Harris, who regrets that he can't be here tonight. He does have a conflict, but he asked me to read this statement. So these are his words. Thank you all for being here to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Pollock, the film. Pollock was once-in-a-lifetime labor of love, passion, and obsession. The fact that the film has so far stood the test of time is a testament to the hard work and artistry of so many people. I'm eternally grateful to all those who were involved in its making. You know who you are. I can't begin to name all of those who were so instrumental in making the film a reality, but I do need to thank Fred Berner, our producer, who weathered many a storm as we fought day in and day out to accomplish what we did. Thanks to Lisa Rinsler for her beautiful cinematography, bringing the late 40s and early 50s to life, and you will be amazed at how authentic it looks. And to Jeff Beal for his beautiful score, Lisa Lawley for the early Pollock works, Catherine Imhoff for her editing prowess, the great cast and crew, of course, and the late Charlie Bergman of the Pollock Krasner Foundation. They could not have reproduced these paintings if the foundation had not agreed. And a very special thank you and shout out to Mark Friedberg, whose production design was absolutely stunning and perfect. When I see the film, I swear that we shot the interiors of the Pollock-Krasner house in the house itself, not on a soundstage in Brooklyn. And the artists he hired to recreate Pollock's masterworks totally blew my mind. I had no idea how we were going to recreate the paintings, but Mark promised me his artists could do it, and they did, to incredible effect. So thank you, Mark, for your brilliance, and congratulations on being honored today. We have love and gratitude and deep appreciation for artists of all kinds who continue to illuminate our lives, in spite of the efforts of some to suppress artistic freedom. Thank you, and enjoy the film.
Ellen was also very important for me in trying to find the real Pollock. And for actors, a lot of times putting them in the place helps them find who they are as characters. And so I think that our collaboration on that front was very important to the film. Did you want to ask a question?
No, go ahead. Then I'll ask.
Should we talk about the paintings?
Sure. I mean, the other, or one of the other significant flashing cautionary producerial anxiety attack lights was how do we do the paintings. And first we thought about green screening them and digitally reproducing them. And by the way, having the choice, the pick of all of those paintings was extraordinary. And there is someone in the audience, our production counsel, George Sheenshang, who did a lot of that negotiation that made all of that happen, which I just want to say, hey, and thank you, thank you, thank you. But how to reproduce that art and put it into an environment where, as Mark has so eloquently called it, emotional architecture, there was no way in the world that to hamstring Ed as a director or actors in their blocking to be in a certain space at any given time so that the painting could be digitally inserted. Contrary to that was my initial thought, and then I went, that's frickin' ridiculous, because how Ed can't do it, the actors can't do it, we won't be able to do it. There was a secondary step which had to do with silk screening, which we thought would give us the ability to add relief to the paintings, which is what's so important about Jackson Pollock's work, which is that there is relief to it, there's texture to it, there's depth to it. So we tried that, and we put some first layers on a silk screen, and it looked god-awful, and it was just, again, we sort of hit the wall of our own ambition. It was pretty much the second question that we asked Mark about how to execute this movie, which was first, where should we shoot it? I did not, he produced the movie. I mean, he figured it out. And the first question was, where do we shoot it? And the second question was, how do we do the paintings, man? And
so the way I remember it is, it was slightly different. I was brought into a room and there was a photograph of a painting. And I don't know who asked me, he said, what do you think? And I said, I think it's a photograph. And there was a lot of concern about, well, there's no way you can reproduce the Pollocks exactly. And I said, I don't know if we could reproduce them exactly by hand, but if we don't paint them by hand, they won't be paintings. And if we don't paint them, I think there's a way that we can decipher how they were painting. And if we can get the palette right and the composition right and the energy right, then maybe they'll have feeling. Maybe they'll be alive. And the thing about Pollock is, I think, it wasn't necessarily about the paintings. It was about painting. And I think that was the clue for us. If we didn't make it about the paintings, but made it about the paint, then we were making a Pollock film. And to that end, we also were able to activate the actor playing Pollock as a painter, which took a lot of energy because he couldn't make the whole painting by himself. And also the way we film isn't just somebody doing something from start to finish. We have to cover it in 67 different angles, and with and continuity becomes an issue. So we had to deconstruct these paintings, figure out the way they were made, and then sometimes in the ones that you see made on screen, make them in stages to enable Ed to be the painter, to see the paint come from his hand and go onto the canvases or whatever it is that he was painting, which was the hardest part. That was the challenge. Building the house right, that was hard, but the challenge was to find the magic. And all we really had to go on beside the paintings was the two Hans Namath films and the evidence of what he painted with and the music he listened to. And that became a big part of it, because when he painted, maybe not always, but a lot of times when he painted, he was physically interacting with the space that he was inhabiting. He was dancing, he was moving, and something was driving him. And that's what we were trying to find, was that energy or that emotion. So I think we did pretty well with it, but what really made it great was how brave Ed was. And you'll see he wasn't a painter before he started this, but you don't doubt for a second that this man, that paint comes out of his hand, that this man hadn't been doing this for his entire life. And I think that's, for me, having just watched it again recently, the big takeaway was how connected to the emotion of the story the act of his painting was. And that for this movie to be an art film about art, and how often do we see that? Not so often, at least not, that's a narrative. More often, at least back in those days, art films were about slashers and kidnapping.
They were about slashers, or they were about the you know, the life of the artist and the trials and tribulations of the artist, and without necessarily really being in the canvas, you know. And it was kind of wonderful what Mark put together, a group that we dubbed the Jackson Five, which was these 5 wonderful New York scenic artists who, you know, heretofore, you know, they'd be called on to, you know, age down a doorknob, or, you know, just, you know, paint a wall or do whatever they had to do to make the scenery look perfect. But given the opportunity and Mark's trust and you know, he leads with his heart. He leads with an artistic spirit that is so tangible and so accessible and so contagious and so filled with love and appreciation for the craft that you can't get out of its way. I am in awe of what he does and what he inspires in the craftspeople around him. So we came into the Bedford Armory in Brooklyn one day, and there were, we've all seen the pictures of Jackson Pollock in the barn doing his thing, and there were 5 people listening to rap music, or
No, Benny Goodman.
Oh, it was Benny Goodman. Sorry.
Gene Krupa.
Listening to the real deal. See, again,
It had to
the
be that.
authenticity. Again, the authenticity. You're right.
It's always about jazz.
Yeah, it's always, and they were the Jackson Five, and they painted those, you know, many of the pieces that you saw, which is a kind of a modern miracle, and in some ways an affirmation of making films in New York, you know, with people who given the opportunity,
Create,
are deeply creative.
Mark, who was you grew up close to the Pollock Krasner house? So who was
Mark did.
Who was Pollock for you?
So yeah, my father, who had no money, he was a farm boy. His dad had been a dairy inspector. He had grown up in a pretty rural existence. Not that he grew up on a farm, but it was. He did pick a lot of onions, at least as he described it. Bought some land with a friend, not having any money, but having a lot of chutzpah, on Accabonac, off Springs Fireplace Road, which was then when we bought it, not now. It was farms, and there weren't a lot of them, and you didn't see a lot of houses off the road. And on our side of the road, on the Accabonac side, there was the Miller farm, the lake house, the Fred Lake house, and there may have been one other house. But that was it for the 3/4 of a mile between his house and my house. And then from his house to the general store was another 1/4 mile. So it was a mile to the general store. And I grew up in those woods, literally, in a very kind of Huck Finish, without the humor kind of way. And so for me, at first, it was a house in Accabonac, in this magic place where I was free and magic happened, and and I experienced this thing called happiness, which was not happening for me anywhere else. But the more we learned about this spooky house, and there was some mythology to it, certainly in the 60s, that there was this crazed artist who had lived there, and that it was a kind of a Boo Radley thing going by there. And so it piqued our curiosity. And I think maybe my dad was having fun with us, or I'm not quite sure how we got to that. But soon after, I took up painting and I took up art, and I started to I started to really appreciate the bold bravery of this man. And also the thing I think that I identified with was his ability to convert rage into beauty somehow. And I had the rage. I was looking for the beauty. So what I was thinking about was the fact that this place, I think, deeply influenced Pollock, but also he deeply influenced the place. And the Springs became something other than it was after he was there. And it became a place that artists came to, looking for the truth, looking for that magic fountain of truth that he found, or whatever it is he found there. And that also really affected, I think, the way we grew up in that part of the world, and certainly for me. And so making this movie was tying these two laces together of a real passion for rageful painting, for painting, emotional, expressive painting, and this place that was the one place I felt like I could be me, that I could find my own magic, I could find my own happiness, that I had a little bit of hope of what I could become. So to get to make this movie was more than craft. It was more than figuring out these problems. It was a really emotional experience. And when I watched it again recently, I really felt that finally. I think I felt it in Ed's performance more than anything. A lot of times what we do in the art department is set the scene, literally. And that can have a great effect on an actor. When you're an actor and you open the drawer and the notes that are in the drawer, even if it's off camera, are things that your character might have, you start to really find yourself in that place. So I think we did a lot of truth, searched out a lot of truth in order to give Ed a platform to perhaps create one of the braver performances I've ever been a part of. And one that's, it's horrifying and it's beautiful. And I think that's a lot about who this guy was. So, Springs.
We want to also give you a chance to ask a couple of questions before the film.
Say one last thing about the Springs,
course.
just for me, is that we were lucky enough to experience the Springs of the 60s. And the Springs of the 1960s was not very different than the Springs of the 1860s, besides the fact that there was combustion. But there were horses, people riding horses up and down the road. My father befriended George Sid Miller, and there was a part of my father that I think, when I see this film, reminds me of the fact that as much as he came to the city and he liked all that energy, there was something about the simplicity and the honesty and the truthfulness of the life out here that he really related to. George Sid Miller's brother was Dan Miller, who ran the Springs General Store, who provided Pollock not only with the food that he ate, but with the paint that he painted with. And in many cases didn't charge him for that, certainly when he didn't have the money. And I think he settled his bill. It's actually in the film. He settled his bill at some point with the painting, which those guys thought was funny at the time. And my father also had a tree nursery out here, so he worked with a lot of guys who had been around for a while, some of whom had built stretchers for Pollock. And they thought there was something kind of odd and funny about him, but they didn't sort of see it in the same way. But I got to buy things in the Springs General Store from Dan Miller. And so to connect that to now, and sadly to see whatever is going on there, those of you who from the Springs might know that thing's been sitting sort of empty, waiting for some giant cappuccino machine or something to arrive. But anyway, to be able to sort of research in your own life in our job is kind of interesting. First of all, it shows how old you are, but it's also kind of interesting.
If you have a question or two, we can take them before the film. Anyone? No.
me just say one thing, and then let's definitely start the film. One of the unique things that happens every once in a while is the confluence of events and emotion, and the fact that this is 25 years ago that this film was made, the fact that it's re-premiering in a community where there is such a deep legacy of art and artists and those who appreciate art and artists is an extremely meaningful moment for me. It is a beautiful community. Giulia, thank you for putting this all together. Mark is a privileged ascendant and descendant of an artistic tradition that is mind-blowingly unique. So thanks, gang, for being here, and we all hope you love the movie.